afternoon, everyone. This is a discussion that, as you can see on the monitor, Disrupting Healthcare, Radical Changes that are shaping the biomedical industry. We have four interesting voices to speak on this who all bring a different point of view, all of which, and everything that they do individually is required to bring to market the products that are necessary to fight disease, to help people live healthier lives, and they all bring a different perspective that I think is pretty interesting to explore, which is what we're going to do in this session. So let me introduce everyone here first. So at the end of the seating here is Michael Chambers, who's the founder and CEO of, former CEO? Executive Chairman.
CEO, yeah, former
right,
CEO, yeah.
Of Aldevron, which is, it's a really interesting story. He founded this lab while he was a student at North Dakota State University, and now it's the leading supplier to the global genomic medicine sector, and still based in Fargo.
Correct, yep.
Right. Although you split your time between Fargo and Boston.
Yes.
Right. Then we have Dr. Stuart Schreiber, who's co-founder of the Broad Institute and a professor at Harvard University. And then we have Steve Pagliuca, who is, among other things, the co-owner and general partner of the Boston Celtics. If any of you are following American basketball, the Celtics are in the playoffs. They're hanging on, we hope, maybe, and the final game, potentially.
Hopefully not the final game.
Right, is potentially happening tonight in Miami. Yeah, sorry. And then we have Dr. Thomas Cahill, who is the founder and managing partner of Newpath, which is a venture firm based in Boston that takes scientific breakthroughs and all the way through to treatments. So thank you all for joining us here in Doha. I want to start a little general and then sort of drill down into some of the topics that we've been talking about as a group over the last few days that we want to discuss on this panel. I think nothing showed more vividly the power of technology to transform medicine, healthcare, research than what we've all just experienced in the last 3 years with COVID. I think that really gave, I'm sure, obviously all of you knew kind of the power of technology to change what is happening in the biomedical field. But for lay people, suddenly it was both critical that it happened and fascinating and heartening to watch how quickly things could be changed through technology and to help fight the COVID pandemic. So as we're thinking about how technology is transforming this broad field, I'd like from each of your perspectives, because you each bring a unique perspective to this conversation, how do you see the biggest breakthroughs that are on the horizon? What is it that excites you about the power of technology at this point to change, ideally for the better, the biomedical future? Let's start with you, Tom.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to thank His Excellency for having us. I'll thank him for all of us. So, yeah, it's on this stage we kind of represent the whole facet from ideation and discovery to clinical development. To the manufacturing, which is also always undervalued that Michael has created with Aldevron. And I think we're really in a renaissance of medicine. When I started at Duke, there were a lot of diseases like metastatic melanoma when I started in 2011 that had a 5% 5-year survival rate. That means if you're 100 people, when they were diagnosed, only 5 of those people would be alive 5 years later. When I finished at Duke, 7 years later, 65% of those people were alive, and that's kind of how fast things are changing in medicine. But it really starts with the idea. And there's very few good ideas. I mean, Stuart's on the stage here. He's ideated 18 drugs that are, I think, clinical, that are FDA approved in patients right now, which is more than most large pharma companies. And Steve, who helped build Bain, I think he's made over 60 life science investments. And so it's a very small group. But there's three main parts. There's drug development, there's manufacturing, and there's clinical trials. And I think we'll talk about all of those here, and Michael will focus on manufacturing, because his company, I know everyone knows where North Dakota is Americans here do, but it's a small, well, it's a big state, but a small population. I think he represents like 10 or 15% of the GDP of that state with this company. What do you think, Steve?
Probably, or if not more.
So Steve, in the investments that you've been making, and as you've tracked this over the years, what is it that, again, kind of excites you? Where are we? What is the potential, and what are you exploring as you think through your own investments?
Well, I've been investing in healthcare per se since 1990. It helped start the Bain Capital healthcare practice, and before that I was a consultant at Bain & Company working for many healthcare companies and diagnostics and those kinds of things. And what we've seen now, I think Stuart, we're about 20 years out from the mapping the genome right now, and that's kind of been the impetus of a lot of change and making everything happen faster. You can simulate things. You can that genome project, which I think at the time was costing hundreds of millions of dollars to sequence.
$3 billion.
$3 billion. Okay, lots of money, and now it's less than $100 today.
Yeah.
So that technology has really changed everything in combination with supercomputing and AI, where if you bring the right group of people together in a cross-functional way, you can really crank out a lot of great therapeutics, biotech therapeutics, life sciences therapeutics for the future. And clearly with the aging population, and as you said, mRNA technology that really saved us in the vaccines, we're probably in a whole new phase of biotech where things can be done faster, quicker, if you can get rid of the red tape and you can figure out how to get clinical trials and get them out there. We're in a kind of a golden age of biotech, and Boston happens to be the hub of that in the United States, probably in the world at this point. And in 2009, I got heavily involved in biotech and started making investments. And I wrote an editorial to Globe that we really shouldn't lose the biotech sector like we lost the technology sector to California. And the government did a great job investing $2 billion in biotech programs, facilities. I helped fund a life lab at Harvard that people can start companies. They've already started 60 companies in there. So it's a very robust ecosystem with a lot of promise. And this technology, the technology of AI, plus the mapping of the genome, and the great group of scientists, have great potential to, change and increase longevity and stop disease. So I'm very excited about it.
I want to come back in a few minutes to what it takes to build that kind of sector, to build, the opportunities that are what we see in Boston. How do you build it in different regions? What does that take? What could happen here, for example, in Doha or other parts of the GCC? But Stuart, you've been studying, I think it's fair to say, chemical biology and human biology for how many years now? Has this been your focus, would you say?
35 years.
Right. And then understanding...
Stuart's actually 120 years old, but he looks like he's because he's discovered the cure.
Yeah. Right. You told me just backstage that you're obsessed with I think you said the genomic, or how did you describe it? The genetic populations of different parts of the world and
Yes.
what that means. So how is it different today versus when you started out 30 years ago? How has this field been transformed, and where do you see it going?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm on that early stage that Tom related to, and then to link to what Steve just said, the genomic ability to sequence genomes, the ability to use computational and AI to analyze vast amounts of data, has really transformed medicine. But we're still in the early stages of that. I like to say that the 21st century is the century of human biology. You may think, well, what else is there? Well, in fact, all of drug discovery through the 20th century was largely based on modeling humans with, we call them model organisms, flies and mice and fish. And so the the opportunities now are immense because for the first time we can understand disease in the context of human physiology. It's pointing to the need of drugs to do things that are unfamiliar to us. So there's a need for innovation and new technology. But with regard to my little obsession that I shared, all that we've learned largely has come from, for historical reasons, the genomes of the European population, European descendants. And it turns out that the genetic population architecture of different regions of the world is really quite different. And the Middle East is a great example of this. Not only that, but there are heritable diseases that we can learn about from these genomes that are quite unique in the Middle East, especially with regard to the immune system. So I personally think the key is collaboration. I think that we kind of know the right kinds of experiments to do. To study humans, we need to do them longitudinally. We need to get together to look at different populations and to use the modern technology to realize the promise of medicine.
Right. And then Michael.
Wait, I had one quick question. Stuart really came up with the drug to cure cystic fibrosis. And that was how many years ago?
1988. Was it 88?
Yeah, we started in 88, and today there's a drug called Trikafta, which has taken a previously untreatable disease, a lethal disease, to a completely manageable one.
And my question was, how would that have changed today if you were starting out on that same quest?
Yeah.
How would that be different than 1988?
Oh, so some of the pieces are in place. So it turns out cystic fibrosis is caused by a defect in a single gene. It took a long time to figure out what that gene is. Today we would look it up in a computer. It took a long time to understand what was broken mechanistically. Today we have powerful functional genomic tools where you could learn that in months to a year. And then lastly, the drugs themselves had to fix this broken protein. You know, up until recently, we always thought about drugs work by inhibiting things. And the human biology of cystic fibrosis said, you don't need to inhibit anything, you need to repair and fix something. Right. So we drew upon what are a technology from chemical biology that my lab had studied 30 years ago called molecular glues, but we had never really extended them into medicine. All of these took a long time. Today, a challenge like cystic fibrosis can be done in a tiny fraction of the time it took for the first solution.
What are you working on now? I'm sure many things, but what is it that you're hoping
I'm fascinated by a number of problems that really fit into this model of human biology. Probably there's two big ones, right? Steve's already mentioned one, is the process of aging. We've come to realize that it's like a disease, and there's different organs age in different ways. But the biggest one for me is the brain. It's the big frontier. You know, we've learned from cancer using precision medicine that when today, if someone says they have cancer, you want to know what kind. And we can molecularly characterize the genes that are broken and so forth. But in disorders of the brain, we say this person has auditory hallucinations. Oh, they have schizophrenia. Well, there's every evidence that schizophrenia is at least 10 or 15 different disorders. And each one, like the difference between a pancreatic tumor and a lung tumor, you wouldn't give the same medicines there. We lump them together because we have no knowledge of the details of these. This is going to happen very quickly as we study the brain. So I'm very excited about opportunities in the neuroscience area in general.
So Michael, you represent the not end stage exactly, but you manufacture what is developed in these
yeah, that's
parts of the
correct.
business.
And it's sort of not so much end stage or early stage, it's the whole spectrum. So we sort of run in parallel to what these guys are doing. And Tom used the term overlooked, and a lot of people
Well,
don't.
you're like the road. We're like the cars, and you're like the road. Without like the road, you can't get anything done.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully keep that road free of potholes and, and efficient. So for context, we make the nucleic acids and enzymes and other components of these technologies that are very essential. They're really GPS systems for these technologies. They tell technologies how to work. And there's a lot of detail that goes into that. It's analogous to silicon in chips in our phones and our computers and many other technologies. It's still silicon. And so our nucleic acids and enzymes are the same. They're universal, whether we're working on a new diagnostic, which is also a very exciting complementary area. We can detect cancer many years earlier now, and we're still learning a lot about that, to N of 1 therapies, where we have highly personalized medicine, to other regenerative therapies, where we're looking to augment or restore or replace or regenerate cells and organs and tissues and even entire metabolic pathways. So there's a lot of interplay between our fields, constant learning about what everybody's doing at every stage. We do a lot of work with Tom, Steve, and Stuart's companies, so thank you for that. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys there. And but it's also a lot of working with regulatory agencies, because these are all new modalities that we're trying to figure out how to build the right analytics around them, how to build the right quality metrics to efficiently reduce the cost. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in this field, because we work very hard to provide a good service. The entire field does, but it's still very, very artisanal. It's sort of requires a lot of expertise. And going back to the silicon analogy, it's like if we were making chips and soldering each one by hand.
Right.
And so we need to make that curve jump to a point where we can do mass production. And one final point I just make about what we do, I think it's impossible to have this panel or any kind of panel without talking about AI and generative AI.
Right.
And that changes everything from a manufacturing standpoint. It enhances so much and allows us to miniaturize and automate and do things right, like investigational new drug applications in fractions of the time that it took just a year ago to do that. So there's lots of opportunity.
So you're already employing that, obviously.
Yes, most certainly. Yeah, I think it's essential for every company to really be adopting those technologies to become comfortable with them.
So just as an example, how does it transform writing those applications?
Well, we're still building that right now, still learning that, but we can go back and compile months and years worth of information, toxicology studies, manufacturing sections, and do all of this to provide a pretty good basis to start from. So just that's a simple example, but it usually takes 4 months, 6 months to write an IND to do all of that work. And we also use it in quality assurance as well, which is largely a very human-driven experience, but it allows us to do more real-time root cause analysis when things go wrong, or real-time quality analysis.
Right. Steve and Stuart talked about what it takes to build this kind of ecosystem that has been built, for example, in Boston. So I'm curious, in the context of Qatar and other GCC countries, should they try to develop this as an ecosystem, and what are the opportunities, and how do you do it? Let's go to you, Tom.
One thing just with Michael is I want to make sure people understand how important it is. So have you ever heard of CAR T or cell therapy? And people in the audience, so he's his company was the first partner of a company that treated the first patient successfully with cell therapy. And so even on that side, you have to have people who take risks to actually go and manufacture something. And the difference between an approval, in a failed trial or a bad outcome is really the composition of that drug that you're putting into a patient.
If I could add, Tom, I mean, literally every single new technology that is emerging in medicine, from gene therapy to genome editing to cell therapies, generates whole new reagent needs, capabilities, and without the
speed with which Michael and Aldevron is able to function, that becomes the bottleneck. So it's every single piece of the chain is in need of working together, communicating needs, solutions. And it's not a bucket brigade. It's, as Michael said, it's beginning with the question, how do we take out a disease? And then figuring out, how do we work together?
So, I mean, back to your question, so we start out with, like, there's kind of 4 different areas. There's early stage and company creation, there's generating that data, there's taking it through clinical trials, and there's manufacturing. You know, on the company creation, you know, if you look at the whole world and you go back to when Stuart founded Vertex in 88, there's really about 30 scientists and about 10 firms who have built about 75% of all successful biotech companies. Every billion-dollar company has come out of one of these labs in the last 30 years, which is quite incredible. So I think that's hard to reproduce almost anywhere, I mean, outside of Boston. But Boston became that way, like Steve was mentioning, because Biogen was founded, then the Whitehead Institute went there, then Stuart founded Vertex, then Stuart founded the Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT, and then you're done. Like, that was the impetus for everyone to come in, and you have that concentration. But where we're really lacking, and where this region could be quite transformative, and even Costa Rica has been transformative in the cell therapy space, is in the areas of manufacturing and in clinical trials. So during COVID, one of the biggest issues in the US, and patients have the same diseases everywhere. They may be a little bit different, but let's use cancer. It's kind of silly to explain this, but there's a thing called a clinical trial coordinator. These clinical trial coordinators are required at the hospital to enroll patients. They enroll patients in clinical trials. During COVID, 70% of these people quit or they were fired. And they haven't been replaced. And so in order to get a patient into a clinical trial, you have to go through that process. And since those people aren't there, we have to get people into clinical trials.
And wait, why did they quit or were let go? Because what happened?
I mean, during COVID, there were a ton of, some of them were overworked, they're underpaid. Right. I mean, there's 4 or 5 reasons.
Yeah, the industry kind of stopped during COVID, basically.
Right.
Also.
So those trials really did. COVID interrupted trials like this? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, COVID interrupted most trials in the US, and they haven't come back on.
Wow.
And so a lot of the trials are being done in Australia, in Finland, in Costa Rica. And the thing is, if we're able to do cell therapy trials across the region in Costa Rica, then you should be able to do trials in a manner that's equivalent in terms of safety and efficacy in the US, but in a much more accelerated fashion, just by following the same IRB. And that's like the institutional review board, like how things are made to make sure that there's no shortcuts being taken. I don't know if you have other thoughts on them.
Well, I was going to say that if you look at economics in general and how the ecosystem was created and are created, how you can create them and lose them. You know, Boston created the technology ecosystem on 128 Technology Highway by building the infrastructure and the offices that had to do it, and then they lost it, probably because of bad tax policies and California Silicon Valley making a big effort.
So non-competes too.
They ended up dominating that. And in biotech, we've learned from that, and we want to nurture that ecosystem, have the governors put in positive tax policies for small companies to form. We have a huge intellectual capital base. How would that apply to creating that outside of the Boston area? I think you would think about joint venturing with some companies or some funds in the Boston area to then develop that intellectual firepower here in the region. And there's plenty of very smart people coming out of universities that can then learn from those companies, the Boston ecosystem. And then over a long period of time, once you have one breakthrough, then other people will come and people will build facilities, and you can have a joint venture with Michael's company to build other facilities and become a hub of that with the great transportation systems that you have here and the ability to reach the rest of the population of the globe. So I think it would be a long-term strategy. It would require a fair amount of investment, but you'd have to partner with the purveyors of the intellectual capital. The original intellectual capital in Boston has come out of the great university complex that you have there, the MITs, the Northeasterns, the Harvards, who have created the scientists, and then that's drawn in further, very similar to the Silicon Valley expertise. So if you want to start a biotech company today, everything is at your fingertips in Boston. If you want to create that in another region, I know Singapore is working on it. Several places in the Middle East are working on it. I think it's doable, And I think it's going to be a gigantic market for maybe the next market for the next 30 or 40 or 50 years as we get down the track on how to cure human disease, how to have a better quality of life for everybody until they pass away, and also extend life.
Right. I mean, it's something we heard repeatedly on the main stage today was the fact that the leaders here and other GCC countries really do have this long-term vision and approach to what they're building. They also have a lot of capital to do it, but that it seems to me kind of what's required to really focus the work and actually accomplish something.
And with the capital that you have in the Middle East, I think you can build incredible state-of-the-art facilities that would then attract people to come over on a rotating basis, where you can then train your own indigenous population to take that over time. So
right.
if you had a thoughtful, 30 or 40-year plan, I think it's very doable for someone who's focused, has the capital, and then allies with the right institutions that can then build the biotech ecosystem here.
Right. Stuart, you mentioned when we first started that much of the work has been based on longitudinal data that we have from northern European countries, and there's sort of a dearth of information on this region in that category. What is the opportunity there for?
There's a huge opportunity that, sort of like what Steve was asking me about, the speed with which it took to tackle cystic fibrosis then and what we can imagine today. I think building up this ecosystem, you don't want to just repeat what's been done, you want to learn from it. So one of the real challenges that we found in studying the genomes and the proteomes of humans is linking it to medical information. The culture of the US, where we gather a lot of data, tends to be that no one wants to say anything about whether they, took a Tylenol this morning, much less any of their medical records. So I think, now, there have been pioneering countries like Finland, like Iceland, and other unique pockets that have banded together for the better good of the population and a willingness to share that. So this need to link the genetic variation of humans with specific medical outcomes is the key to the future. So I think putting in place a system, and I imagine here, with, again, the unique genetic opportunities in the Middle East, where you've combined them from the beginning, would be a tremendous opportunity.
Right. Which I think some people, will then have the next question, which is how do you protect that kind of data? People are concerned, obviously, about the privacy of their, in some ways, most fundamental data.
From who?
Well, I mean, that's a good question.
I mean,
I think the
companies,
systems today can really, first of all, anonymize the data, and you do it on an anonymized basis. And then many people are willing to put the data in, even not anonymously, because you're trying to help your fellow man. So I think there are systems and security protocols where you can do it they don't have to know your name, they have to know your profile, so that they can see if those profiles match other profiles and what disease is coming out of that, and how do you track that down.
Right.
And I was also going to say, another way to develop the ecosystem might be from the other side of this, Michael developing the supply factory, the supply chain, and then that will then bring in other people that know about biotech, and you could do it that way as well.
So I love this question, and I think you can look to North Dakota and to see what's been built there, because before we started Aldevron, we did not have anything that resembled a biotech economy. And now Fargo sort of sticks out on this map. I mean, Boston, of course, is sort of the center of the universe for biotech, but in the center of the U.S., you have right down the middle of the country these great manufacturing companies. And this is my first trip to the Middle East, and I'm just captivated by what has been built here, the beauty and the vibrancy, and I think it's such a testament to what can be done, you're driven by purpose and determination. And I think if you can apply that to manufacturing, you could really build what needs to be built. So not just a me too, but you could build probably the best. Now's the time, with how fast the new era is moving and how fast technologies are being developed. And quite frankly, the science has outpaced manufacturing. But now's the time to start something new, take advantage of all these orthogonal technologies, and use that same determination that built this to build a manufacturing center. And that gives you access to all of these other companies. Going back to North Dakota for a second, and you can really hear that when I say that, you can hear my accent. I just broke through there. But Aldevron works with every genomic medicine organization. And every week, many companies are coming to Fargo to participate in that, so we can work together to figure out how to make their stuff. And there's a huge exchange of information. And from that, we've had a lot of other biotech companies in our region spring out from that. So I think manufacturing is a very important sector where this region can play a critical and a leading role for this part of the world and for the entire world.
Mike, what are the barriers, the key barriers to scale, going from a more bespoke, custom approach to a global, high productivity manufacturing approach?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of principles of mass production that need to come into this. So many like gene therapy. I think we have 10 gene therapies approved now, or something like that. So it's still pretty new, but there's thousands in development. And a lot of people didn't think about manufacturing until we're right before commercialization. And it's like, oh boy, we should have been considering this, 10 years ago. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the technologies that exist to do things. So I think it's a lot of lean production that has to be brought into this. A lot of AI. We need a better understanding of biology, and we have that now. Increasing yields. A lot of these gene therapies start in big fermenters. But if we can increase yields for those cells, we can make that a lot smaller. So we can use technology to miniaturize, to automate, and then use AI to automate a lot of the quality assurance and manufacturing steps that we discussed before.
So do you foresee coming back to the region?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have. So I still work for Aldevron. We also have a family office that does a lot of investing in biotech, and so very interested. Okay, all right. Well, you heard it here.
So Tom, we're running out of time, but I think again, from your perspective, tell us what you see as the opportunity here, and what would you like to see happen here?
I think, if I was to look at the opportunity, what can be done most quickly or more efficiently, they could be, right now, the U.S. for manufacturing, like Aldevron and some other companies in the U.S., the next, I would probably say, is Australia, actually, for manufacturing. And so we use a lot of Australia. And the reason is they actually, 10 years ago, they said, we're going to pay the U.S. taxes for companies so that they start building their companies here. And so of our 20 companies we have 10 that are based, obviously in Australia, because we get a check in the mail every month paying 44% U.S. taxes to our companies. And so I think manufacturing is something that can be set up really quickly. It's scalable, and it'll drive talent in. The next would be, I think, you pivot to either the fork is clinical trials, replicating U.S. clinical trials, or just working with companies here. Like I have 10 companies that run clinical trials. The U.S. has a lot of friction, sometimes 9-month delays where patients don't even live long enough to get enrolled. The people here have the same type of disease, especially in the GCC. And so that's a hugely impactful area, which will drive talent. And scientists don't really, Stuart and I, we don't necessarily really care if we're working in like, a tiny little room or like a beautiful place. Like we just want the data. Like, and scientists are going to be able to travel anywhere to get data and to help patients. The second part is what you can do for the population. If you take the same approach as Finland, and now Finland is the most patriotic European country. I think something like today, even today, something like 70% of Finns would die for their country, in 2023, which is probably double the amount of any other country in Europe. They had a lot of...
Is that why they never smile?
I think it's because Russia's right there. I think that's the reason Russia's...
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's that massive border with Russia.
But they took a long-term approach, and because they have kind of a community mentality, Finland and then some of the other northern countries, they started, I think they started in the 70s, or was it when they started thinking about this, Stuart. And they took blood from people, then they followed them longitudinally, then took blood from their kids. And so they're able to go back and sequence and figure out disease like how Crohn's disease happens, or ulcerative colitis. And the truth is, almost every disease, whether you think of Marivarrock for HIV or the monoclonal antibodies, they're based on a single patient that had a unique mutation, because humans are so special. And the fact that we're only looking at this population means we're missing kind of the solutions or cures to things like MS, which is probably like 23 diseases and not 3. So I think the data set in the population is really key. And then I think you have to do those 3 things, and then over time, like in Boston, it took 33 years to go from no real biotech to a biotech hub. You'd have to kind of take that long road and draw the talent in that does that innovation, because again, there's only 30 people like Stuart in the world, and most of them are in Boston. Say half are in Boston.
And I would add, I think we're going to have to, certainly in the U.S. healthcare system, really reorient ourselves to say the data is critical to help everybody, and let's get around the data issues, and let's have more sharing of data and a central database that will help everybody in the country and everybody in the world. So we've got to reorient the thinking from, okay, this is a bad thing, to actually it's a good thing, and how do we protect people's confidentiality?
Yeah. Because everyone has the disease. I do too, but if I sequence everyone, they carry definitely at least 1 or probably 20 diseases that are fatal if they carry 2 copies. And so I think when you go to that level, everyone would have a precondition. And so at scale, it doesn't matter. That privacy thing kind of doesn't become as much of an issue.
Right. All right. Question?
I would love to hear your thoughts on longevity. What has been done so far in the different fields? Are you working together maybe on different milestones? I'd like to hear your thoughts if possible, please.
On longevity?
Well, we've already established Stuart is 130 years old, so.
There's a singularity. What's happening in that sense?
Well, I think we always want to, I think you want to term it decreased all-cause mortality. And so as clinical trials are run, I think we have drugs. You think about statins, you think about blood pressure medications. Those are, in essence, longevity drugs. I think the GLP-1 drugs, as you all are familiar with, semaglutide, Rybelsus, tirzepatide, the biggest correlation for longevity is weight.
Yeah.
It's weight.
So maybe I should say reversing the aging process. Maybe I didn't use the
So, yeah, I mean, I'll let that, my view, one way to view it is we can make your cells live forever, but you'll die of cancer. And so the aspect, aging is actually in a lot of ways an anti-cancer process. So by reversing that, you're going to increase, in my view, often that risk of a cancer being generated.
Yeah.
Stuart?
Let me start by saying the first thing we have to deal with in thinking about reversing the aging process is there's a hype to fact ratio, which is very concerning. So we have to sort through, as often happens in a new area, you get some sort of irrational exuberance and people who are willing to articulate that. Now, that's a cynical view, but on the very positive side is that there are basic mechanistic capabilities today for the first time to actually, in an unbiased way, ask in a human body, organ by organ, what is the precise mechanism of aging? And we find that the mechanisms that are emerging are actually quite different from that early high hype to fact ratio. There's completely new processes that I think are more grounded today. So it's an area that is still very early, and it needs to adopt, in my view, more of a brick-by-brick approach rather than believing in some very speculative model.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Before we go, Steve, how are the Celtics going to do tonight?
I hope they're going to win. I hope, our shooting has been way below average, and you see reversion to the mean a lot in the NBA. And so if we can get to our average, we would have won the last couple of games. And
Right.
so we only need to do that 4 times in a row. So let's start it tonight.
All right. Thank you all very much.